thank you, everyone who has chosen to be here. I know there are lots of very fascinating sessions going on at the same time, so I'm really grateful for everybody who has come here, and we'll try to make it worth your while. Today, we are talking about artificial intelligence, fake news, and digital rights. My name is Sadaf Khan. I am the co founder of Media Matters for Democracy, which is a local nonprofit that works on the intersection of journalism and technology and digital democracy. We are living in an age where all of you, especially young information consumers, when you wake up, you pick up your devices, or for the older generation, probably tune in the news, look at the newspaper, and everywhere, no matter where you are consuming your information, you'll see something which has been affected by artificial intelligence. Whether it's the news headlines, whether it's proofreading, somewhere or other we've seen AI creeping in. If you're posting on your social media, you will see on most social media now you have an AI generated thing, get help from AI. If you're looking at your mobiles, you will get that tag, get help from AI. So AI is essentially something that is seeping in consistently through every part of the information ecosystem that we are exposed to. And I'm sure here and in other places, you must have heard about how AI is going to either end everything or solve everything. There are lots of extremes that are going on in the discourse. And to discuss all of this, I have two brilliant minds with me. We have Nighat Dad, who is the founder and executive director of Digital Rights Foundation, a pioneering organization that has been known for its work on especially privacy, gender, digital inclusion. And we have Bruno Macaes. Am I pronouncing it right? Macaes? Okay, great. Who is a political thinker, and I saw that you were also a journalist when I was trying to research. But you've also been the Minister for European Affairs from Portugal. And with you both, I hope to explore a few things, but I also want to set the stage a little bit, especially in context of Pakistan. We are a country with a very big mass of young population, and that's something the country also takes pride in. But we're also a country where digital literacy, even literacy, is very, very low. And there are divisions that exist not just in terms of socioeconomic disparity, but also in terms of approaches. There is an ideological divide. There are lots of polarizations that impact how we come together as a society. And that is important, the way our society is structured. That's very important, especially when it comes to technological consumption, news consumption, that is algorithm based and algorithm led in so many ways. So, what happens when a population which is actively discouraged from critical thought through our educational system, a population that is systematically and structurally fed information that polarizes them? And our political parties have been responsible for it. And what happens when we are living in a regulatory environment where there is no space for nuanced discussions, where there is no space for nuanced discourse, and we are then exposed to terms like fake news, which is actually a part of this title. But think about the history of the term itself. 2016, Donald Trump weaponized the term itself, and by combining the two terms, fake and news, which is something that's very prevalent in our vocabulary, we're also systematically discrediting journalism. We are systematically discrediting journalists because it's so inherently linked to how we perceive the media. And then, obviously, we live in a system where we have seen more dictatorships than democracy, where political thought is not as nuanced, where student unions are banned, where political discourse is banned, and then comes in AI, creates all these distinctions. In many cases, increases them. How do we really navigate, and what does it mean for our civil liberties, our political rights, the way we inform ourselves and make informed decisions, especially around democracy, especially around political processes, especially around our political alignments? I hope that we will be able to start picking the threads, because we won't be able to cover everything, but we can start picking the threads. Bruno, I want to start with you, since you are a guest in Pakistan as well, and you also launched your book just now. And I want to start by posing a question. that links to what technology has done to our perceptions of reality. There has been a very deliberate blurring of lines on what's real and what's not real. The perceptions have been linked to facts, and value judgments around information have increased. Now, with AI amplifying these effects, especially by making content creation, making viral content creation so accessible and so easy, how do you think we stand to? What shifts do you see basically in how we practice civil liberties and how we practice? We practice our political functions as voters, as participants of the democratic process. How is it going to change?
Yes, I mean, I would say, like many other people, that we are in the process of migrating to virtual reality as human beings, and like like the kind of migration that you know from one country to the other, it is a difficult process of full of challenges. We're entering a new world that we know very little about. In the end, it all started with the internet, didn't it? Maybe we didn't know at the time. There's a famous video circulating of David Bowie saying that this will change everything forever. And the interviewer is very puzzled. How can you? This is about 2001 or something like that. And the interviewer is very puzzled. How can you, David Bowie, say that? This is just a communication medium. It won't change anything. But Bowie turned out to be right. The internet turned out to be the beginning of a virtual world. The present moment seems to me, if I want to summarize it, we used to be people who lived in the physical world, in the real world, that did a few things on the internet. And now we are people that live on the internet that do a few things on the physical world. We come out of the internet occasionally to eat food and go back to the internet. Uh, Look, in European history, coffee shops played a very important role. It was many times where revolutions were launched and decided, and new intellectual movements were launched. Now you go, coffee shop is just a nice place to plug your computer and to go on the internet. But everything is happening on the internet. Sometimes in the talks that I give all over the world, people ask me, what is the capital of the world? Is it still New York? Is it London? Is it Shanghai? And the answer that I used to give is, well, it's Twitter, because it's actually where most things are happening. Would you prefer to live in Manhattan without access to the internet, or would you prefer to live in a village in the middle of nowhere with access to the internet? Honestly, I think most people would answer a village in the middle of nowhere with access to the internet, because you would feel much more marginalized living in Manhattan if you could never go on the internet. So this is the reality we have now, and it has changed everything. I think what we're seeing in the United States is directly a reflection of that. These are political movements that were Trump, MAGA, wokeness, and so on and so forth. The political movements that were launched on the internet and now have spilled into the outside world. They exist in many respects outside reality as normally conceived. I think we see that all the time now. When you had the recent floods, remember in particularly in North Carolina, this was 1 or 2 months before the elections. And I was quite puzzled because the same people that were always against the interpretation of climate change as man-made, as human-made, were now arguing all over the internet that these floods were human-made. But human-made in the sense that something created to disturb or modify the result of the elections to prevent people from voting. So all kinds of conspiracies have now started to thrive. And in many respects, they are starting to shape politics. Look at the debate about the so-called grooming gangs in the United Kingdom that is happening now. The level of misinformation is off every scale, but it's shaping politics, it's deciding elections, and it's increasingly replacing the reality we are used to living in. I'll stop here, just a brief introduction to where we are and how serious the present moment is. It's a migration to the virtual world.
Thank you. Nighat, I want to come to you with something that Bruno has actually just said, that the internet is the capital of the world. And I want to pose this question, recognizing that we are a post colonial country and we are quintessentially global south with all the problems that and all the challenges that global south has, and recognizing that a significant portion of our population just either doesn't have access or doesn't have meaningful access, even if they're connected. um, and we've seen in the previous government, when Imran Khan was elected, the title of the Twitter Prime Minister being flagged everywhere. We have seen how exclusionary political movements have been on Twitter, even when it was not Elon Musk led. And in that context, I wonder, whether this is a new form of imperialism as well, because what you're saying, Bruno, is these are also discourses that I hear in the UN, where it's just a given that people are connected, where it's a given that lives are being lived online. And that somehow doesn't ring true to me in contexts like ours. But the policies will be made within the reality that Bruno has just outlined.
Yeah.
What does it mean for us? What does it mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, I mean, Bruno's argument around virtual, like we are migrating to virtual reality, I agree to this argument to some extent, but I think we also should admit that we are living in a world where, there are two, there is global north and global south, right? And a lot of technological advancements that we have seen in last one decade or over the years, it's like those advancements, innovation, regulatory approaches in the EU or even in the US have dumped on us. Even the technology, like these platforms, right? These American-led platforms, we embrace them, thinking that they are also, made for us, but they are not. Look at how Musk just bought Twitter and made it to something else. I don't think any one of us who have been working on these platforms or trying to hold them accountable uh, had an idea that Musk will use this as a political tool. But just you separate yourself from the all this like American technological advancements and EU coming up with Digital Services Act and all of that, and then just ourselves. We are left with this platform with absolutely no protections, with absolutely no trust and safety teams. Disinformation is thriving on them, and I think the digital lack of digital literacy in Pakistan or in South Asia or in our countries, actually it's making it worse, because people think that these platforms are there to spread information, to share information, to raise awareness, whatever, or to share their own narratives and opinions. It's still the case in Pakistan, but it's actually not. What you see is uncontrolled disinformation and fake news, um, and targeted disinformation, and no one is there to control. And so you question your government state, which is the narrative in Pakistan. You question like what government is doing, what state is doing, what political parties are doing. But then I think we lose the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that these platforms who are thriving in our countries are actually not in our control, and there is absolutely no narrative. Like I haven't heard from anyone that, oh, should we hold Meta accountable, or should we hold Musk accountable? Now, we have also heard what Mark Zuckerberg said a couple of days ago, right? Bringing community notes to combat
Very
disinformation.
excited for the users to take control. That was
Exactly. So you just imagine like a Pakistani society, like polarized society. People have political opinions. It's divisive at the moment. And a lot of information that is coming in and people rely on, it's like vloggers and YouTubers, right? Because they don't trust the legacy media. So what we are seeing is that we are trusting those users to basically combat disinformation on this platform. So what kind of disinformation they will combat, and what kind of community notes we will read? I think these are all the questions that we need to ask. But all in all, I actually blame Global North for this. They didn't take us along, in all these conversations when since the internet started, like they made these regulations, even EU, DSA, yes. DSA is good, Digital Services Act, holding platforms accountable. But at the same time, did you ever think about Global South? Because what we do in our jurisdictions, we copy paste all these laws and bring into our jurisdiction and say, okay, ये आपके लिए कानून है, अब आप इससे deal करें. But we don't have that ecosystem to enable those laws. So I'll stop here, but I'll add more.
Thank you, Nighat. A couple of threads that I want to pull from what Nighat is saying. So I see that there are lots of people who look like students here. I don't want to assume, but I don't know कि कितने लोगों को history का शौक है. But when we think about imperialism, imperialism has certain very prominent, specific aspects to it, and within that, there is obviously the fact of taking over, that you're saying, coming somewhere, taking power. But then there's also the question of resources. How are resources taken? How are resources flowing from one end to other? I think my mic's okay. It's started again. And then there's also the question of narratives and what's normalized and what's not normalized. And specifically when it comes to digital platforms with global community standards, like Meta, and right now with Zuckerberg pulling the funding from fact checking, which I always thought was a bad idea, by the way, platforms actually investing into fact checking. But first creating an ecosystem where it's a given that fact checking will happen and somehow platforms will contribute to it, and then putting the onus on the users to fact check, add community notes, etc., while taking a lot of resource from countries across the world, not just global south, but global north as well, but specifically in Pakistan. The biggest chunk, I think over 50%, 60% of our digital ad goes to Meta and YouTube. It does not come to the local industry. Some of it comes back to our creators, our content creators and YouTubers, but the majority, the bulk of the money that was supposed to, that could have an industry flourished actually goes to these tech platforms. They thrive on the data that is collected. They hone their algorithms, and especially for a populace that is extremely vulnerable, that is polarized. And we've seen that across the world with the global rise of populism, how algorithms are pushing content, syndication of news to AI, creation of all these bubbles. Do you, Bruno, see this as a form of digital imperialism, and what does it mean? How do we, without power, people without so much power like us in these countries, how do we start dealing with it?
Yeah, well, to some extent, but I was thinking, listening to your comments, that some of the things you're complaining about, people are complaining about in Europe very loudly, particularly the last 2 weeks. People feel vulnerable to Musk, for example, to the campaign that he decided to launch against governments in Germany and in the United Kingdom. I know for a fact that the European Union would like to respond. Why doesn't it respond more aggressively? Because it feels we now have this situation where we have a Trump-Musk administration. Therefore, the power of X is not just the power of the network, but it's also the power of the U.S. government that one feels is behind it. The European Union knows that if it tries to go after the X platform, it may suffer retaliation not just from the platform but from Trump. And retaliation could even take the form of a withdrawal of security guarantees. You know that Vice President J.D. Vance said a few months before the election that whether NATO would be ready to defend Europe would depend on how Europe would regulate X. Can you believe something like that? That things are getting mixed to the point where the U.S. military is is being brought in as a kind of enforcer for Elon Musk's business plans. There's Elon Musk's business plans, and the U.S. military is behind those business plans. I'm not exaggerating when I put it this way. At least that's what the American vice president said. So that is my first comment, in the sense that we kind of in this together. It's not like Europeans are in charge and people in the global south are being ruled over. I can tell you that Europeans feel like they're being ruled over. Now, we don't know exactly by whom, because some people also speculate that Musk is doing what he's doing over the past 2-3 weeks because he's been so influenced by his feed on X. There was a piece in the Financial Times a few days ago explaining what has happened to Elon Musk, and the theory that they developed, and they talked to people around him and so on, was that after he bought X, he started using it massively. Well, it's clear that he used it massively. People sometimes ask me how I can tweet so much. I mean, I tweet 1% of what Musk does. I don't know I can do anything else. And he doesn't seem to sleep either. But now, if he's always on X, and now there's this little feed that is specifically tailored by the algorithm for you, the more he tweets about Muslims in Europe, the more the algorithm gives him news, fake news about Muslims in Europe. So, that's my second note, that I'm not even sure that Musk is in charge, because he may well be manipulated by his own platform. That's my initial response. But I agree with you, and let me say immediately that I agree with you that the global south is in particular dire straits, much worse than us in that sense, because massive amounts of capital are going to be needed in order to keep these new processes under control. We know that with AI, it all comes down to the data that is used. It all comes down to the compute that is used. That's the chips. It all comes down to the supervised learning that is imposed on these models. That's particularly expensive. That's when really high skill human beings spend endless hours training the model with questions and answers. That's the way to train a model. And this is so expensive that one has to assume only 2 or 3 companies in the world and only 2 or 3 states in the world are going to be able to train these models. What is the problem? Is that then everyone else is going to use these models. But if I want to convey one message to you today that I think is really important, don't think for a moment that these AI models are transparent or neutral and that they are giving you knowledge. They are giving you always and by necessity an extremely biased view of the world. They have been trained with select data. They have then been subject to supervised training and learning with certain goals, certain programs, certain orientation, certain biases. And so what you get is a particular mind, not a universal mind. You don't get the mind of God. You get a mind, extremely powerful, but it's a mind with certain biases, certain goals. So, for example, in China, you have AI models that are being trained on Xi Jinping's writings. And then what you get is an AI model that thinks, reacts, and has the same emotions as Xi Jinping. If you use this AI model to educate yourself, then you're going to become a copy of Xi Jinping. But don't think that this is only the case in China, because the AI models being produced in the US are being produced with their own biases. If you're getting your education from ChatGPT, you are molding your mind in the image of a model that has been trained with specific purposes, with specific data, and with specific supervising learning programs. So the people who have the money to train these models are in a way going to be inside the mind of everyone else. It's pretty scary.
Yeah, definitely pretty scary. And if you want to test for yourself, ask ChatGPT if what's happening in Palestine is genocide, and you'll see the kind of hoops the model will jump through to try and prove that some people say it is, but I actually ran a very interesting experiment on ChatGPT, and I asked it to create a fictional world for me. for a novel in which an AI that's created by, you know, I explain what the geopolitical situation is in different words, what the AI model would do and what would it be like and who would it benefit. And it was fascinating because despite everything that's happening, ChatGPT kept trying to give me plots in which AI is positioned very positively, will solve all the problem of medical and health and resource distribution, but not actually be used for exploitative purposes, which it already is. So it was fascinating. It's so true that how AI is trained and the knowledge that goes into training AI. This is not indigenous knowledge. This is not knowledge from local cultures, local politics. This is knowledge that is very elite, not just Western, but elite Western knowledge that informs how these AI models are thinking of themselves. And again, coming back to you, Nighat, you work with communities who are marginalized, and we live in a country that's extremely patriarchal, almost tribal in nature. And when it comes to gender and women, in the West, I know there has been a rise in the red pill, Andrew Tate kind of philosophy. We don't use the same words here, but we have seen a lot of regression in how women are perceived, how people engage with women in digital spaces and in physical spaces. We have seen the shift in the narratives that is targeting women in the Aurat March or different organizations. Do you think AI has something to do with it? Do you think technologies have something to do with this shift?
I mean, I think the targeted disinformation and fake news about different movements or women journalists or women politicians, we have already seen this in last couple of years. But and many of us have been saying that 2024 is a year of election, and like
Hello.
we hello. And we need to keep watching these spaces. And there was also this sort of argument in the around the world basically that we need to keep watching deepfake and use of AI and how this will manipulate elections in different contexts. And we monitored Pakistani space during elections. And of course, there was a use of AI, but it was very gendered as well. We also saw the spike of deepfakes on the eve of elections when not many people were watching online spaces. But then there were certain actors who were actually generating a lot of deepfakes. And some deepfakes were not harmful, right? But then you kind of look at the question, you're like, okay, these are not harmful, they are trying to generate political discourse, they are trying to bring out the narrative of a political party or segment which is oppressed at the moment. But is this ethical? So there are like questions around ethics. But I think it kind of also provoke questions around if AI is not harmful, is it responsible or ethical? And with the gender part, what what we have noticed and monitored and gathered data is like women journalists and women politicians, their deepfakes were a lot on different platforms, especially on X. Unhinged, uncontrolled. Even when you report it, a platform not taking it down, and folks reaching out to us. We have a cyber harassment helpline, reaching out to us saying, like, if and those deepfakes were like based on nudity, right? So it's like sexualizing women. And in Pakistani context, we all know like how it is, like sexualizing a woman, and then the narrative sort of like it just spreads like fire. So really, like public figures who we see on TV, strong women reaching out and saying, can you please report this? Like it's difficult for me to answer my child who is seeing this and who just cannot figure out whether this is deep fake or this is real picture, right? And should I just like focus on my political campaign or my journalistic work, or I should like answer all these questions to people who are saying that whether this is a true story, this is synthetic history, or is it like a deep fake? So yes, this is a different reality for us. But then you look at US, and like we had deep fake of Taylor Swift. So it was, she was not worried that she will be on or killed, when her deepfakes were, they got viral. They had different pros and cons of this. So I think the context is very different. And it's in Pakistan, and several other countries like us, like, in the tragedy is that we are not really focusing on how to govern AI. Of course, these technologies are being built, being designed, trained in the north, not keeping us in mind and then dump on us. But then our state is also not doing anything, like copy pasting something from the north and then say this is our AI regulation policy or whatever is not a solution. That's what we are struggling with here. And then I'll say a little bit more that at the UN Secretary General's AI high level body, we tried to address this question where everyone should have a seat on a table, where US is like, we have brought this AI executive order, but then you don't want to talk to China. Like, China is a big player, So this geopolitics is playing a huge role in terms of where AI is going. And I think countries like Pakistan really need to find that space, where we stand in this geopolitics, but what we are going to do with this.
Bruno, because Nighat's talking about geopolitics and that's your subject as well, I was reading this book, The Coming Wave. It's Mustafa Suleiman, who's Microsoft's um, lead of AI right now. And the first chapter is titled Containment is Not Possible. And he's essentially talking about a wave of AI that's going to be taking over the world, transforming everything along with biotech. Geopolitically speaking, the rifts that Nighat is highlighting, whether it's China and US, whether it's Russia, whether it's the power dynamics between South and North, within the spaces where there is discourse on international regulation, on standard setting per se, on safety at the design level, on all these things that go on, how these things would be allowed to develop. How is the geopolitical situation of the world right now, which is so volatile, I would say? How is it having an impact? Is there things to be done about it?
Well, I don't think there's any hope for global regulations, in large part because of the geopolitical situation. That these technologies are seen as a very powerful weapon. Countries are rushing to develop them first. They cannot agree on standards. Possibility of any kind of consensus is long gone. And so the idea that the United States and China could agree on something very substantive, I think it's quite impossible. We are in a worse situation than what happened with nuclear weapons, where at least some points of agreement were possible, but I don't think they're possible anymore. The difficulty with AI and geopolitical power is that probably we're seeing the emergence of weapons that are just as powerful as nuclear weapons, but that they will actually be used as opposed to nuclear weapons. So AI, what it can bring in terms of geopolitical power, we don't know yet, but we know it's absolutely dramatic. We see some of the effects already. We see it in Ukraine. We potentially see a particularly perverse use of AI in Gaza. You know that Israel has been using AI to identify targets, but again, it's about how AI is trained, because you can feed into the AI the parameters that you want the AI to use. You can say that you want to target people that have been conclusively identified as Hamas, or you can say that you want to target people that have a 10% chance of being Hamas, or you want to target people that are Hamas and people who have had contact with Hamas at any point in their lives. Then the AI starts to process these parameters using all the data that Israel has on Gaza, and at the end it spits out a list of targets that could be 50,000 people, 100,000 people, 150,000 people. You can find in an Israeli magazine called 972 how AI has been using in Gaza, and you'll get pretty scared. In terms of warfare, gives you a kind of visibility over everything. You know that AI can process hundreds and hundreds of parameters. parameters that are invisible to the human eye, and therefore grants its user powers that we can only dream about. We've seen it in Ukraine as well, the ability that Ukraine has shown to detect very quickly targets in Russia. Russia is still using the methods of the past to try to hide its weapons, and we see that it's clearly struggling against some of the capacities that Ukraine has and some of the capacities the US has provided Ukraine with. And finally, I think you wanted to talk a bit about disinformation and what AI is also going to be able to do in terms of disinformation. We don't know yet, but we expect it to be dramatic as well. Uh, Let me give you an example. This new AI model, Claude, from Anthropic, the company that is developing it, one very interesting game you can play with it is give it a text written by you and ask the model if the person who wrote the text is a native speaker of English or not, and then ask the model to guess. The text is in English, but ask the model to guess where the person is from. And what is extraordinary is friends of mine, I haven't tried it yet, and I really hope, because I pride myself on how over the years I've developed, at least in my books, maybe not when I'm speaking, a very good English prose. But I suspect that if I submit a text to the model, he will eventually guess where I'm from. But I know friends of mine that you would never guess, even when they're speaking, that they're not native speakers. And the AI goes through the text, and at one point, something that no human being would be able to detect, a little pattern in the way the grammatical construction was built, it detects that this person is from Malaysia. So I mentioned this because it gives you a good, vivid example of how this AI is able to get inside your minds to know you better than you do. You know, maybe someone, a human being, talk to you would never guess that you're not a native speaker. But even if they guess you're not a native speaker, you'd have a really hard trouble guessing where you're from, just from a text. If it's a really great writer that has written in English for 30 years, but still something from the childhood is still there in one particular construction. So if you have an AI that is able to know you so well, then the obvious conclusion is this AI is going to be able to create the perfect way to influence you and to move you. It's going to be able to create a perfect ad that is aimed just as you, knows how your mind works, knows what makes you tick. And if he wants to convert you to a particular political candidate or a particular political view, this AI is going to be able to write the perfect email to change your mind because it knows you better than you know yourself. So we'll send this email to every inbox in the country, and suddenly the next morning, public opinion has completely shifted on a particular subject matter. Potentially also on geopolitics, where one country can try to influence public opinion in another country by using these tools.
Very Black Mirror bleak, and but so true. And I think, especially sci-fi writers have been predicting it. But what I was thinking about is, I mean, I'm sorry for being literary, but Isaac Asimov, who was a sci-fi writer from another era, even his iRobot, when they're developing the AI, one of the things that is fundamental to the concept is they can't harm the human race. And you might have seen this theme recurring in different sci fi movies and whatnot. And yet, here we are when the real world application, there is really no consensus that actually harming and influencing, I would say manipulating, that is the goal, that is the end goal, and all of it is kind of also related to money and capture of power, capture of resources. So advertisement and marketing, yes, but also then political ideologies, where money is going, where money is shifting. We have seen right now in LA what's happening. Public opinion was shifted at that time to increase funding to the police force. Well, not something that was done just by the mayor without having any public support behind it. So yeah, it's extremely bleak. And for us, I mean, one thing, Nighat, that I want to pose to you, because we're also questioning coming to the question of rights, and I will open the floor after that so we can have some discussions around it, is this question of money then. Because money is something that, especially in our context, is kind of seen as dirty, especially when it comes to journalism. I always hear this word that journalism has now become a business, as if journalists are somehow supposed to, I don't know, they don't have money growing trees. So we're in a country where the discourse around money is really taboo. Um, how do we actually have meaningful discussions on how these, money making revenue generation models within platforms, within AI models, how they're developed, and how do we engage with them? Because if we can't engage here, we can't definitely engage at the global level.
Yeah, we were discussing that in the previous panel as well, and I think all this monetization on different platforms have shifted the way journalism is being done in not only in Pakistan but around the world, and I think a lot of people are actually consuming. The information that is put out by vloggers, right? But I think there's not enough knowledge that what role monetization is playing. Um, we lack knowledge, but also there is not enough effort to hold existing platforms accountable. We are talking about AI, I'm talking about existing platforms. In terms of, like the transparency around their monetization, and, like who's getting money, how much getting money, what they are doing, what content is being monetized. And of course, we all know it's like sensational content, like which sort of thrives on these platforms and bring profit to the platform. So the money is involved from different ways. And to be honest, like, I don't know, I think I'm like, from Pakistani perspective, like struggling to address this with platforms. Because we are not their focus. Their focus, and now with all this like change in, like Trump administration and American companies and this discourse, I'm not sure how much global South or global majority, is among their priority list. I don't think we are. But and I'm not sure I'm responding to your question, but like what Bruno earlier said about weaponization of AI, and I actually, what I have witnessed being part of UN Secretary General's board, and dealing with different countries, all these Western countries do not want to address, the question on AI and autonomous weapons. They are avoiding it. Even the regulations that they are making, the US AI executive order, like even in the EU, they are not really touching upon on this question. So that's where you are like, okay, like, what are the power dynamics here? Yeah, like who is benefiting from, even from these regulations, when you are trying to regulate AI in your own countries? And I think that's what we tried to address in our own report that we gave to Secretary General. And then a couple of our recommendations were added in Global Digital Compact. I'm not sure, Bruno, if you know about this, but this has been approved in UNGA last year. Um, and I'm not sure where this will go, to be honest, with all the power that we are seeing that UN has at the moment. But at least it gives space to the countries who do not have space to decide where the AI is going. It's like US, UK, EU, like all these 6, 7 countries having all this discourse in their jurisdictions around AI, around regulations, around innovation, and then we are just the receivers. So at least the UN will give some space to this, to the governments or the states who do not absolutely have no idea uh, from where they will start this discourse, and they have a seat on table. But it's not all, gloomy picture. I think Pakistan played a very positive role in one thing, which is the resolution around AI and autonomous weapons. And they were also part of, like developing that resolution with some of the countries like Netherlands, and that has been passed. Some countries didn't vote for that, but there are some things that are happening, and I feel that if we actively participate, we will get somewhere, not sure when.
Thank you, Nighat. With that, I want to open up for questions, but also, I do want to bring it to surface the fact that users have a huge role to play, and I don't think there is recognition. How can I get a show of hands? How many of you use ChatGPT? Almost everyone. Okay. How many of you use Meta AI, whether on your WhatsApp or okay? How many of you have generated illustrations or anything using an AI model? Have you been thinking about the things that we just discussed? Did you think that what you're getting from ChatGPT or Meta is actually very biased and not neutral? Yeah. So I think that recognition of the power we hold as users, who are we are the resource. We are what it makes goes, and global south is also called global majority. So a lot of resources are coming from there. I don't see that public recognition or exercise of power, which is something that we can use to our benefit perhaps. But I'll end here and open for questions. We have 15 minutes. I think I'll take 3 questions and then open. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Yasra Sani, and I am an MPhil scholar in English literature. Since you mentioned about science fiction, and we know that how speculative it is in its nature, what should we think that, what are we fighting against when we say that AI is going to overpower human beings one day? Because right now, sitting in this room, I feel that it knows about me much more than I know about myself, right? And I hope that most of the people in this room feel the same. So how much, to what an extent we should be precautious against that? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take 2 more questions and then open.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Waqas Sadar and I'm a professional advocate. My question is that with the rise of AI, everyone use AI, but it creates problem for the personal privacy. How can you tackle this situation? So can you suggest some recommendations to the government to make patterns for the use of modern technology?
Okay, I think I'll come back to you. I get you've worked a lot on privacy, so maybe we can start with the second question because the first question is quite difficult to answer. But,
I mean, we have already discussed that, these, especially these AI technologies are being developed somewhere else, right? So it all goes in design, like whether if you're if there is a privacy by design, all good. If it's not, then like if you have already developed a tool and then you are then dealing with the privacy issues, then it's of no use. It's my opinion. But you are talking about governments as well. I mean, sitting in Pakistan, we don't have any data protection law, right? So एआई की बात में बात करेंगे पहले तो आपका जो टेलीकॉम का जो डेटा है राइट सो ऑल दीज स्कैम्स एंड स्पैम्स एंड एवरीथिंग दैट वी आर गेटिंग ऑन आवर फोन्स हर वक्त आपको व्हाट्सएप पे कभी सॉरी ब्रो आई एम जस्ट लाइक we are getting these like scams and like कोई आपको कॉल करके कह रहा है आईएसआई से बोल रहा हूँ बेटा आपका किडनैप हो गया है आपका नंबर कैसे गया भाई मतलब दीज आर सो बेसिक क्वेश्चंस जो हम इस मुल्क में स्ट्रगल कर रहे हैं पिछले 15 सालों से एक डेटा प्रोटेक्शन का कानून हम पुश करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि वो तो खुदा के लिए पास कर दे सो दैट योर जो एग्जिस्टिंग यहाँ पे आपकी टेलीकॉम कंपनीज योर बैंक्स लाइक कितने लोगों के पास आपके यू हैव द बिगेस्ट बायोमेट्रिक डेटाबेस इन द वर्ल्ड विच इज नादरा आप हाउ मेनी टाइम्स हैव यू ऑल हर्ड दैट इट हैज बीन हैक्ड हैव यू हर्ड अबाउट दैट रेज योर हैंड यार मतलब कोई नहीं you haven't heard about that please go read about this how many times there were attempts into hacking that database it's the biggest how many of us actually know कि हमारा कितना data किसके पास है In this country, we have no knowledge, and we have been pushing to have a, until or unless your state brings a good data protection law and we deal with the address the structural issues around data protection. AI वगैरह की जो बात है ना, वो in global north countries की है. You know, like we have been pushing them. You are designing this, you are dumping this technology, you have to do this privacy by design. What we can do here is to push our government to bring good data protection law. That's where we have to start.
In answer to your question, and since you mentioned science fiction, there's this sentence in Dune, the science fiction book, that I like, and it's this: once men turned their thinking over to machines in the hope that this would set them free, but that only permitted other men with machines to enslave them. So the idea is the real, and I fully agree with this. The real danger is not machines ruling over human beings. The real danger is other human beings using machines to rule over human beings. I really don't see any danger that the AI is going to be in charge. Who's going to be in charge is the people programming the AIs, the people with money to program the AIs, and they can rule with other human beings without being seen. It's the perfect kind of power. It works completely in the shadow. You think you're using a neutral, unbiased model, but you're not. In some cases in the future, you might not even know that you're using a model. By the way, that's already true. If you go to the internet, you might think you're not using AI. But since increasingly the texts on the internet are produced by AI, when you use the internet, you're using AI already without knowing. So, I mean, the question is really about power between human beings, and I think there's actually something deceptive when people keep insisting that the danger is AI. I would be much more concerned with other human beings enslaving you using machines, as Dune puts it. As for privacy, I'm going to say something a bit provocative, that I think it's not up to governments, it's up to us. We need to develop new strategies. Now, you're not going to be able to remove yourself from the internet and from digital life, but perhaps you can use certain number of strategies. So I said before that reading your texts, an AI is going to be able to know more about yourself than you know about yourself. In order to target an email specifically at you, it has to go to your social media feed and collect all that data. And I have no doubt that an AI using my Twitter feed would be able to find out everything about me and would be able to get inside my mind. But how about the strategy that in the future you start to be a little less transparent and less sincere when you go to your social media? That you develop different personalities. That on weekend you're someone, but during the week, try to confuse the AI. Sometimes lie, sometimes pretend, create alternative personalities. This would be my suggestion. Not for you, because it's too late for all of you, but for your children. So that even after 20 years of posting on social media, no one is able to know anything about you because you've been pretending all the time.
Well, that's a good scenario. But there have been experiments like that. So on Meta, for example, there have been a number of people who just clicked everything that came to their feed because the algorithm figures out what you like and pushes it to you depending on what you click and what you engage with. So people have randomly used different browsers, whatever, clicked different things, and their feeds completely shifted. However, it's a time investment, of course. Nighat, I also want to. In fact, Bruno, you were saying we were consuming AI even if we didn't know. Do you know that most of the global news production agencies, including Reuters and AFP, they have syndicated news to AI, which means that they are using AI to generate content, push it on social media, and obviously everything that we have been discussing, whether it's bias, whether it's the removal of that human element, whether it's the inclusion of elements that clickbaity elements, that has been happening even from very credible news sources, because it is just resource efficient. It does what three people would do in the same time, perhaps. I have time for one last question if anybody has it, and then we will. Okay, we have two hands. So, okay, I'll take both of them, but very quickly. No, Tamit, please, directly to the question. You and then you. Can somebody pass the mics? Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for the panel. It was truly fascinating listening to everyone. My question is for Bruno. You said at one point that globally we are already past the point for a geopolitical or global political policy amongst different countries when it comes to AI. And my question is specifically when we look at AI safety or AI militarization, which is obviously very concerning from what we are reading and listening to the panel here. Is there a way forward via AI policy between countries themselves or collaboration, or what would be the solution? Or do you think it's just going to be like different countries on their own and the broader populations, like when we talk of ethics or how we adapt to AI, how we use it, is going to be more of an individual effort, or do you still see it from a policy perspective as well? Thank you.
Okay. Can you answer and then we'll take the last question?
Or do you prefer to take the last question?
Okay, we'll take the last question here and please add your closing remarks with this answer as well.
Hello, my name is Sadaf. My question is very Bruno. The idea that you have given like multiple personalities upon social media to avoid like getting into the AI stream. There is a book the New Digital Future People, Nation and Business written by the CEO of Google. And in the same book, he has provided this notion that the parents who like to choose that their child should be outstanding, they will designate a difficult name for their child. And those who want to like choose that the child might be blending the crowd, they choose common name. But in the same book, they have given the idea that first this digital revolution will benefit the masses in the way they to communicate their ideas and challenge the hegemonic empires. And later, the world democracies will turn into the autocracies because they know how to control people by their mind. And it's way easier if you controlling them by their mind, but not by their bodies, because you don't face any resistance and like what I say, rebellion movements when most of the people are controlling by their minds and they don't have any free think and like to oppose the government. So what do you think the future of democracy, especially in Europe, where we assume that people could think freely?
Okay, so the first question. Yes, I can't see real hope for global regulations simply because everywhere I look, I don't see any agreement on the norms, on the goals, on the values. It's a very fractured world where finding consensus on values and goals has become almost impossible. So if that's not possible on less critical fields and less critical areas, I don't see how it's going to be possible in an area where all the major powers think this is where the future is going to be decided. They're all trying to rush ahead of everyone else. And they all regard attempts at regulation as a way to try to slow them down. So whatever regulations are going to be agreed on are just going to be rather superficial and non-consequential in my view. I'll suggest, for example, that even though there's been some success in regulating autonomous weapons, from what I read, Israel is using autonomous weapons in Gaza. As I said, it depends how you define autonomous weapons, but to be quite precise, if you feed a certain number of parameters to the AI and the AI gives you a list of targets, and then the list of targets is fed into your weapon system and those people are targeted, this is an autonomous weapon. What would make it even more autonomous if the AI would decide on the parameters? I don't think that's what we mean by autonomous weapons. By autonomous weapons, we mean a process where the final decision to target a human being is essentially in the hands of the machine, And everything I've read about what is happening in Gaza, the final decision is in many cases in the hands of the machine. The computer spits out a list of people, which, by the way, many times it's the wrong person. It's very easy. You know, I didn't mention this, but this is another troubling aspect. It's very easy for the names to be confused, for people to have the same names, for someone to lend their cell phone to a friend and suddenly the person that has been identified is targeted because is not targeted and someone else is targeted because he happens to be holding his cell phone, and other cases of the same kind. But that's what I anticipate. Everyone will be using AI in this and other ways. And perhaps when there's a regulation about autonomous weapons, it will have a very legalistic, formal definition of autonomous weapons that won't stop their use in the ways that I've just described. Um, and finally, democracy. You know, all that I've said so far is to argue that probably democracy is in trouble. I think to some extent democracy relied on the existence of a physical world that was not open to manipulation. If everything is open to manipulation, then those who have the power to conduct this manipulation have almost no limits. This is the argument as I see it. You could try to see counter arguments. You know, some people would argue in the past those with money had the advantage that they could buy intelligence. They could hire the most intelligent people, and that's the scarcest good in the world, intelligence. AI is going to make intelligence very cheap, and therefore it will be accessible to everyone. This is the best counter argument that I know that actually AI could have democratizing consequences. Again, to be totally honest, the way I think is more in the opposite direction that I've described throughout in my comments. But let's keep an open mind, and also some of these things can still be shaped and can still be influenced. We can try to push it more in one direction than the other, and we can try to use some of these consequences and deepen them and try to prevent some other consequences. The important thing is to understand the full range of consequences that are on the table.
Thank you, Bruno. Nighat, you have the last word.
No, I mean, I would say that I also think that I don't see that there will be like one global regulation for AI, but at least I see that there is a threshold that is defined by one unified body around safety, ethics, and responsible AI. And of course, governments and different states will come up with their own local regulations based on their local realities, and like what sort of the kind of constitution that they have, and the kind of technology that they are using. But I still see a hope. I mean, I think there is a lot of work for us to do as a global majority and global south to push back global north and disrupt this concentration of power when it comes to AI, investing in AI, innovation in AI, and the money that is going into AI.
Thank you, Nighat. Since time is up, I don't have time to really summarize this very rich discussion, which would have been difficult to summarize anyways. But I'll take what Nighat had said in the end. Informed engagement and disruption at a much more massive level that's been happening. That's what's needed. Thank you, both of you, for this very fascinating discussion.